Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Hey, my name is King. If you don't know who I am, my name is Israel King. I'm a writer, director, and anime commentator on my main channel, King Tannic. Now, if you've been a fan of pop culture for any amount of time, then you surely must have noticed the sudden rise in popularity in anime and manga. Films breaking box office records, series topping the most pirated show of the year chart, and of course, the very apparent fan base that has surrounded it. According to a poll back in February of this year, about 50% of Gen Z watches anime. Now, if you're not Gen Z, it can be kind of hard not knowing anything about this new, sudden, very popular corner in the pop culture zeitgeist. And that's where we come in. King Tannic and the Burnett Network have partnered to bring you the best anime and manga related news show on YouTube. The Otaku Experience is your go-to place to find out the biggest stories of the week in the anime and manga industry. Still not convinced? Try the show out for yourself. The show airs Thursdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time or 5 p.m. Eastern. The Otaku Experience, only on the Burnett Network.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, which we're going to talk a lot about tonight, and of course, the as yet undefined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm coming at you. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 872. What a crazy day today was. Between like Hunter Biden's plea deal, between Kevin Spacey being acquitted, between Roman Polanski and Woody Allen being allowed at the Venice Film Festival, and of course, the congressional hearing on UAPs. That's right, unidentified aerial phenomenon, and some of the crazy revelations that came out in that hearing. Things I'd never heard of. For instance, the fact that we had a pact with the Soviet Union that was signed in the early 70s, well, an agreement that was made in various ways, that if there were ever aliens that came to Earth, we wouldn't start shooting nukes at one another in order to find out what was going on. I'd never heard of this before. That David Fravor, of course, who participated in one of the most highly documented from a military perspective UAP incidents ever, and what is David Gorsh, who is the whistleblower who's already presented all of his evidence under the Whistleblower Act. He's done everything legally. People are like, well, where's all the evidence? Oh, he already presented it. It's just people now have to look at it. It's crazy. You know, it's all nutty. And, of course, people are like, well, you know, Rob, it's all a psyop to keep us. It's so funny to me when people are writing to me, it's not real, it's a psyop. And I'm like, if you're writing about it not being real and it's a psyop, it's not a very good psyop. I mean, you know, but it's all very, I don't know what to make of it all. But flights of fancy, imagination, all kinds of craziness. Can you separate from the art from the artist? Really, what it just got me thinking about was the Exorcist the Exorcist Believer trailer. I couldn't get off that because obviously I did not get the 2000 numbered volume big box set with the BFI book from Amazon UK. I didn't jump on that enough. Didn't get it in time. So, you know, my favorite horror movie of all, but whatever. I mean, how many times do I have to own The Exorcist? A lot, apparently. But got to get that 4K. Can't wait. Hate the American cover. But I was thinking a lot about Exorcist Believer and why I was not impressed by the trailer. I talked a little bit about it yesterday. But then it got me thinking about a lot of things. Why didn't I like Secret Invasion? Why haven't I been enjoying Star Trek? What's the problem with all of this stuff? And it brought me back to things that I believe about genre storytelling, science fiction, fantasy, and horror, specifically horror. Because I grew up, I read a lot of dark fantasy and horror novels. And when I say horror, people say, are you saying horror like Ken Russell's horror, like she's a whore? No, horror. Horror, to be clear. Horror. Although there are great horror novels about horrors, if you want to look for them. But I, and by the way, I have no problem with sex work as a profession. But it just got me thinking. And I think I need to explain a little bit of my personal philosophy. And people have heard me, who've watched this channel, they've heard me say this a lot. But I would like to take you back to the Japanese movie Ringu and its American remake, directed by Gore Verbinski, The Ring. And I want to talk about the cosmology of horror. And I'm going to tell a story about The Ring that I want to ask you. But first of all, you're probably asking, what is cosmology? How do you define cosmology? I went and got a few different definitions so we could take a look at them together. Cosmology is a noun. One definition, a branch of metaphysics that deals with the nature of the universe. B, a theory or doctrine describing the natural order of the universe. Or 2, a branch of astronomy that deals with the origin, structure, and space-time relationships of the universe. Also a theory dealing with these matters. So cosmology, the meaning and the function, the workings, and the hows and whys of the entire universe itself. Let's look at this. I went to Wikipedia. Cosmology, from the ancient Greek cosmos, world and study of, is a branch of physics and metaphysics dealing with the nature of the universe. The term cosmology was first used in English in 1656 in Thomas Blount's Glossographia, and in 1731 taken up in Latin by German philosopher Christian Wolff in Cosmologia Generalis. Religious or mythological cosmology is a body of beliefs based on mythological, religious, and esoteric literature and traditions of creation myths and eschatology. The science of astronomy, cosmology, is concerned with the study of the chronology of the universe. All right, let's go even further. Physical cosmology is the study of the observable universe's origin, its large-scale structures and dynamics, and the ultimate fate of the universe, including the laws of science that govern these areas. It is investigated by scientists, including astronomers and physicists, as well as philosophers, such as metaphysicians, philosophers of physics, and philosophers of space and time. Because of this shared scope with philosophy, theories in physical cosmology may include both scientific and non-scientific propositions and may depend on assumptions that cannot be tested. Physical cosmology is a sub-branch of astronomy that is concerned with the universe as a whole. Modern physical cosmology is dominated by the Big Bang Theory, which attempts to bring together observational astronomy and particle physics. More specifically, a standard parameterization of the Big Bang with dark matter and dark energy, known as the Lambda CDM model. Theoretical astrophysicist David N. Spergel has described cosmology as a historical science because when we look out into space, we look back in time due to the finite nature of the speed of light, which I've always thought was cool. You look up in the night sky and you're looking literally millions of years back into time, because that's the light that we're seeing from the stars is from millions of years ago. A lot of those stars might not even be here anymore. Who knows? Maybe there's Dyson spheres around those stars now. We don't know. But what do I mean by cosmology in terms of horror? Or cosmology in terms of fiction? Well, to me, the cosmology of any fictional universe is its world building. J.R.R. Tolkien, definitely his stories of Middle-earth and the cosmology of everything from the Astari to, we'll talk about the dwarves, the elves, the different races. He was creating his own universe that had its own cosmology. The Greek gods, the Roman gods, the Greek gods, their own cosmology, how they were all interrelated, whether it was true or not. If you're a Star Trek fan, I guess it was true because of, Apollo. But that's what the cosmology of those universes are. Well, I was thinking that I've always been a stickler for these cosmologies in fictional universes. I think one of the great problems of modern Star Trek is they don't pay any attention to their cosmology. They make it up willy-nilly. They don't pay attention to the actual universe. There's very little science or physics in modern Star Trek, which is annoying. If they want to have red beacons show up in the galaxy, they show up all at once, no matter where they are in the galaxy. One, we can see them, when it would take how long for the light of those beacons. It's not like you're lighting the fucking beacons of Gondor, summoning Rohan for aid. It's not like that. But, in modern Star Trek, the people writing modern Star Trek have no cosmology at all, and it drives me fucking crazy. Now, why do I want to tell this story about The Ring? The Ring cracks me up. One, I thought the original Japanese version, The Ring, Ringu, was really good. And Gore Verbinski's remake of The Ring, maybe you could even say might have been even better. But it's always cracked me up. The cosmology of The Ring has always made me laugh. Why has it made me laugh? Well, whatever the universe, yes, it takes place in the physical, our universe, essentially, but there is also the supernatural cosmology of The Ring. Now, for those of you who know The Ring, if you know what I'm about to get into, or if you haven't seen The Ring, you might want to dip out here and go see The Ring. Go see Verbinski's Ring, or go see the original Japanese Ringu. See if you like Samara or Sadako better. Who am I to say? But we all know that in the movie The Ring, this is what you are asked to believe. There was a girl, evil. She was tortured because she was evil. Maybe she was doing evil things, which is why she was tortured. But for whatever reason, Samara in the American version, Sadako in the Japanese version, she, while was in therapy, was able to project images from her mind. Somehow. Project images onto a videotape. She was able to affect the videotape and was able to project these images, haunting images that related back to her and her trauma, onto this videotape. Well, somehow a copy of this videotape got out. And it's out in the real world. And if you watch this videotape, you put it on and you watch it, after it's over, your phone rings. And on the end of the phone line, presumably it's Sadako, says, 7 days. And then when 7 days pass, Sadako comes out of your TV and scares you to death, does some fucked up shit to you, and leaves you a desiccated corpse in the closet. Or whatever. Unless you give the videotape to somebody else and they watch it. Then Sadako or Samara will leave you alone. Now, I've always, when you're watching the movie, you don't think, you're like, oh my God, you're terrified. It's terrifying. It completely works. But when you think about the cosmology of the Ring movies, whether it's Ring 2, whatever, so they're asking you as the viewer to believe, if you really stop and think about it, that one, that somehow this child was able to project images on a videotape that you can play in a machine, that her psychic emanations could somehow reorganize metal oxide on a tape, and just like if you were recording off the magnetic heads, if you're doing it, recording a TV show. So that's one ask. Now, this girl was dumped in the bottom of a well and she's dead. She doesn't exist. So somewhere in the universe, Sadako is out there, and she knows when you've watched her videotape. Now think about that. Think about that for a minute. Think about the cosmological, if you're talking about the origins of the universe, let's talk about where first of all, where is Sadako? Is she in hell? And does she have a cosmic switchboard or some kind of she like Adrian Veidt in front of his TVs, watching all the information in the world, you know? And so when somebody watches her videotapes, it goes ding, 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 ding. And then like, you know, somebody in Pig's Knuckle, Arkansas is watching her tape. And then somehow she has a phone line. She calls you and she goes, 7 days. And then she takes her timer? Does she look at does she set it's on her phone or her iWatch, you know, her iMac, whatever, the iWatch. She sets the 7-day timer and she just kicks it back and wherever the hell she's existing, whatever nether realm, whatever Stygian depths of wherever she lives. And she's just chilling, kicking it for 7 days. And when those 7 days are up, if you haven't passed the tape along and her cosmic switchboard hasn't lit up with another name that she's called up in 7 days, she's going to somehow manifest herself, crawl through your TV, and kill you. Which then begs the question, well, why would she want to do that? Why wouldn't she want her video virus to continue on so the curse of Sadako or Samara would be her truth would be known? I mean, if you think about it, if you think about The Ring, and I have to say, I think The Ring is fucking scary. And when I first watched that movie and Sadako came out of the fucking TV, it freaked the fuck out of me. I think it's one of, arguably, if you've never, I mean, I just ruined it. I'm assuming you've seen it. If you haven't seen it, you should go watch it. I know I've ruined it for you. But anyway, it's one of the great moments in horror film history. It really is. And the way they did it in the American version was great. The Japanese version was great. One of the best cosplays I've ever seen in my life was at WonderCon, with a girl was doing Sadako coming out of the TV. It was fucking genius. You could probably look up Anaheim WonderCon The Ring cosplay or Sadako cosplay or whatever. It was incredible. It was incredible. Kudos to you, my friend, whoever did that, because that was some brilliant cosplay. But when you think about it, what does that say about the cosmology of the universe as it is presented in that movie? It says a lot of things. It says that a dead kid, well, first of all, it says a kid can have psychic emanations and imprint their images that are taken out of their subconscious that deal with their trauma onto videotape. You could do that. Then after you've died, you've somehow wound up in a place where you're connected to the tape, you know, somehow, like somebody tells you, like, and imagine, what is that mechanism? What is that mechanism that allows Samara Sadako to know that you watched the tape? Like, what is it? And then beyond that, the timer, how does she know it's been 7 days? Like, I mean, and what if you're on Pacific time and she's on Greenwich Mean Time? Like, how does she know? Now, I understand people are going like, Rob, doesn't matter, it's a horror movie. But in my world, it does. Because in order to tell an effective fantasy story, science fiction, fantasy, or horror, I think it's really important that if you establish rules, and science fiction, horror, and fantasy films are only as good as the framework of the rules of whatever universe you decide to build. And remember, if you're writing a horror story or a fantasy story, science fiction's different because unless you're sort of limited by our own world. I mean, you can change things if you want. I remember reading Flatland, like when I was in elementary, like in the 6th grade, the book Flatland. I'm like, what the hell? But if you're, I was trying to wrap my head around that one. But if you're, you have to create a credible framework with which to work in. Like, I'll give you an example of a good one. Hellraiser. So in Hellraiser, you know, they present you with the lament configuration, which is your box, the puzzle box. The puzzle box comes into the possession of people that are, in the case of Frank Cotton, Frank Cont is very unsatisfied with his corporeal existence. He literally wants his soul to be torn apart. Like, he'll fuck his brother's wife. She'll give him, like, the greatest rim job in the world. It still won't be enough for him. And he really wants to open up the lament configuration, open up the doors to hell, meet the Cenobites, and have his body torn asunder or whatever. So in Hellraiser, the idea is that you must be seeking the lament configuration, and you have to open it. Nobody makes you open it. You open it. And once you've opened it, you've opened the doorway that allow the Cenobites to come from whatever part of hell. They've got their own little niche cul-de-sac in hell. They're a very specific form of Hellion creature, whatever. They don't really get into it. I mean, there's Leviathan. How does Leviathan fit with... Who knows? But what's great about, especially the first two Hellraiser movies, the original directed by Clive Barker, and then the next one, Hellraiser 2 Hellbound, adds to that mythology. We actually get to go into that neck of Hell's Woods. And so it doesn't tell you everything you need to know, but it offers a credible cosmology in terms of, okay, it's presenting us with, we have our world, and in addition to our world, there is this supernatural realm that is governed by rules and laws. You meet Dr. Chenard, all these people are human beings that are wildly ambitious and crazy and self-centered and narcissistic, or for whatever reason that they want the lament configuration, they get it. They open it up, and then the Cenobites come. The Cenobites don't just show up. They're not going to come, like if you're having a bad day, they're not going to come get you. You have to open the box. So it's the Hellraiser mythos beginning in the Hellbound Heart, Clive Barker's novella, provides that framework. And I've always liked that. When it comes to horror especially, I've read so many books about creatures and monsters and demons. Like, when I was a kid, talk about cosmology, before I'd read the book, I saw the movie, William Girdler's 1977 The Manitou, with Tony Curtis as Harry Erskine and Michael Ansara as John Singing Rock, and Susan Strasberg, and it was about Misquamacus, this Indian medicine man that came back to Earth, and he's growing as a fetus on the spinal column of Susan Strasberg, and then when they X-ray Misquamacus, the X-rays damage him, so he keeps growing, and he's born, and he's going to wreak havoc on humanity. It was fucking weird. Okay, it was weird, but the movie was I went and saw it because it was post Star Wars, so I didn't know it was based on a book, and of course when I found out when I went and saw the movie, I'm like, oh my god, Graham Masterton. I ran out and got Graham Masterton's book, The Manitou, and read it. Evil does not die; it waits to be reborn. And while it didn't all hang together, it was like, okay, these Indian medicine men. And what I did not know is that Graham Masterton liked to, I wouldn't say culturally, let's say culturally appropriate many of the different worlds, whether it's indigenous people, different ethnicities. Like he brought back a Japanese demon in Tengu that set off the San Onofre nuclear power plant to seek revenge for Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I mean, he would do that, and like the Jinn and all that, and he would, which was kind of cool because he used the indigenous cultures, or not the indigenous cultures, that's the wrong word. He used the different cultures to create each culture had its own cosmology that it talked about what the demons wanted or what the monsters wanted. So they had rules, and it was based on the culture that they came from. And so when I was reading all the Graham Masterton's books were great because for my 10-year-old, 11-year-old, and 12-year-old brain, there was all this really great explicit sex, and there were great monsters and lots of gore, just like early James Herbert novels, like The Dark and The Rats and The Fog, no relation to John Carpenter's movies. And it was all great, and I loved all that. The more graphic the sex, the more graphic the violence, and the cooler the monsters, the better off. That's why I was reading horror fiction. I was getting my rocks off, as a preteen. But all of the world building for what these creatures were doing was important. James Herbert's The Dark, like how did you when the dark came, what did you do? It was all of that stuff. The rules fascinated me. The world building fascinated me. And I always thought that was really important because it added an extra layer of something that was cool. Like you could figure out stuff about the world. You could make suppositions. You could be like, okay, if A, B, and C are true about these monsters, then maybe D, E, and F are also true. And that sparked my imagination more. And like even in, you're reading Lord of the Rings, like Tolkien addresses all this stuff in Lord of the Rings about Gandalf and the wizards and like Sauron and their relationship to Sauron and all this stuff. And he didn't tell you everything. He was explaining these different relationships. I mean, you could go back and read the appendices and read the Silmarillion, but he'd figured all this stuff out. And by doing so, when you're reading all of this, it made it that much better. Because you're like, oh my God, there's all this stuff to learn and know. And more importantly, you knew that the man who was telling you this story was already ahead of you. So all of the questions that you had in your mind, he'd already figured them out. And that's what I think that's one of the things that attracts us to especially these larger ongoing series with these huge worlds. Certainly, Stubble McShave, our friend Stubble in Sweden, loves the Wheel of Time books because of that. When Brandon Sanderson took over from Robert Jordan, he continued with all those things. And that's why people love those books. And all of our look, to me, Star Wars had that. At least Star Wars and Empire. Even if George Lucas didn't quite understand it, his collaborators did. Like the people at ILM George Lucas probably wasn't particularly... when in Empire Strikes Back, when they say that we're having problems adapting speeders, the snow speeders, the speeders to the cold, I'm sure the people at ILM could tell you what that meant. Like where on the snow speeder were they having problems? Because they would have to figure that out. Like, okay, here's a snow speeder, how does it work? And one of the great things about Star Trek, for instance, and which was mind-blowing, like Star Trek the Motion Picture. One of the things I loved about Star Trek the Motion Picture is you finally got to see how the impulse engines worked in tandem with the warp engines. You could see the intermix chambers and how it all worked and how they figured it all out. They figured the internal layout. That's one of the reasons I love the refit Enterprise so much. Whereas when you watch Star Trek Discovery, one of the reasons I hate Star Trek Discovery is they have no clue to what the inner workings of this Discovery look like. There's all this empty space, and that's one of the reasons when people ask me, what are the reasons you hate Star Trek so much, modern Star Trek, is because they've paid no attention to any of that. None. And since 2009, it's fascinated me that the people making modern Star Trek just don't care. They just don't care. And it drives me insane because I care, and I'm watching this going, what? Well, you don't even know the internal makeup of your own spaceship, which means that you have nothing more to tell me, because no story you're telling, and this is one of the other things I can't stand about modern Star Trek, they never figure out their stories. They don't go, okay, well, if A, B, and C are true, then D, E, and F are also true. They'll come up with their stupid premise, like, oh, we're going to make Spock fully human. But no one stops to think about it, like, okay, if his physiology now, if these aliens have taken him, and again, that was an idea, like the Telosians, they'd never seen a human before, so when they put Sue and Oliver back together after being in a spaceship crash, they just do the best they can, which seems pretty stupid because they're also biped humanoids. Wouldn't you think that would be a good let's keep that symmetry so she's not like, but okay. But these are questions I ask myself. So anyway, I was thinking about The Exorcist as well. So now you've kind of got the backstory about where I was coming from. And one of the great things about William Friedkin's The Exorcist is there really isn't a cosmology other than faith. The way that good and evil is presented in Scripture, they pretty much assume that that's what's going on in that book. In the movie, And in William Peter Blatty's novel, he was a Jesuit priest. So the way that, you talk about Catholicism and what you might learn at Georgetown and your belief system it's pretty much the cosmology is the cosmology of the Catholic Church, which is also very similar to a lot of vampire mythology, which I really, really like. Now, I also like when they deviate from vampire mythology and you see things like Near Dark, or they make vampirism a disease. That's always cool too. It has a disease vector to it. On one hand, I like the supernatural nature of it. A vampire has to be invited into your house. That's all cool. But I also like the Spear Brothers, like not Day Trippers. That's Greg Montola's movie. Daybreakers, right? Is Daybreakers the vampire movie with Ethan Hawke? By the way, total aside, if you guys haven't seen Predestination, which is based on the Robert Heinlein novel, or Robert Heinlein short story, All You Zombies, Spear Brothers, they made it after that vampire movie. Watch it. Don't read about it. Just watch it. Just watch Predestination. It'll blow your mind. But anyway, so I was thinking about The Exorcist, watching The Exorcist trailer. And I'm like, okay, the thing that really bothered me and I know it's just a trailer, but I'm watching this trailer and I'm like, okay, these girls disappeared in the woods for 3 days. So they're already violating the cosmology of The Exorcist. And look, they might have some explanation, but if they're gone in the woods for 3 days, something happened to them. And you see things that are dangling from the trees in the trailer. I'm like, so there's cultists or whatever. So they're gonna give away. They're gonna it just whatever it is, it's gonna be stupid. I can already tell you, whatever it is, it's gonna be dumb. They're gonna try and over-explain everything, because the whole. If you look at what The Exorcist is actually about, whether you are a believer or not, we all come from Judeo-Christian tradition here in the West. We all understand what Scripture means. And the story of The Exorcist is the story of faith. It is one of faith. And you have Damien Karras, who ends up losing his faith. And in confronting the ultimate corruption of an innocent, he finds his faith again. Now, what I've always, I'll get to, which I like. So you're dealing with the cosmology of Scripture, basically. But now I want to tell you a story about a project I was involved in. So right after I made Free Enterprise, my good friends, Ashley Miller and Zach Stentz, Zach brought me a script that they had written that I loved, called Night. And the premise of this script, it's never been made, but the premise of this script, this is like 25 years ago. The premise of this script was vampires have taken over the earth en masse. And there's been nuclear war, all kinds of things. And the earth has basically been bombed back into the Dark Ages. And there are now feudal states that are like the Tokugawa shogunate, but it's the world is controlled by these vampire overlords that live in buildings that are like 1,000 feet high. These citadels, these castles, keeps, whatever, gigantic things that have been built. And the only people that stand in opposition to the vampire world order are the the mafia and the Catholic Church, who, as they have in the past, they team up to fight this vampire world order. And of course, human beings are in their houses, and they because the vampires couldn't get rid of all the humans because they need them as their food supply. So what was really interesting for me as I'm reading this script, it's badass. And I imagine the main character as being like, imagine Robert De Niro in Goodfellas. He plans the Lufthansa heist. He pulls it off. He's a legend in the underworld community in New York City. And then fucking vampires take over. So all of his work and everything that he'd hoped for and everything, all of his dreams were washed away. His money's worthless in the new world. And he's just like, I want to fucking kill these motherfucking vampires. And that's what he wants to do. And he teams up with the priests. And, they have the same kind of weapons like in John Carpenter's movie Vampires. So they have all kinds of really cool arcane weapons that with a modern spin on them. And it's all about something that happens in this one realm on Earth with this one tower. And it's like a Men on a Mission movie. You know, it's like Where Eagles Dare kind of thing. It's vampires and World War II and feudal Japan and fucking awesome. And I had a friend of mine named Rob Pryor, who some of you might know, do a lot of artwork of the characters for me. But I was looking I started to think about the fact that, okay, well, if vampires like are not natural, so we're going with the classical supernatural vampires, then in my thought, I was trying to come up with this there must be a cosmology for this world, this vampire world. And I'm thinking, okay, so vampires, like in my mind, hell is a place. Because if vampires are building their own keep, their own citadel, I'm like, well, what does that look like? And if they've got their own, because I was thinking the same way that H.R. Giger informed Ridley Scott's Alien, the derelict alien spacecraft, the xenomorph itself, all of that biomechanical stuff. And I'm like, well, and what was funny was H.R. Giger's stuff Giger's stuff was published in book form by Gallery Morpheus. And there was a Gallery Morpheus, published these art books. So I went to Gallery Morpheus. I'm like, I wonder if they have somebody like H.R. Giger. And I found somebody like H.R. Giger. And I found this person, Zdzislaw Beksinski. It misses the point to ask me what scenes in my paintings mean. Simply, I do not know myself. Moreover, I'm not at all interested in knowing. Zdzislaw Beksinski was born in Poland in the town of Sanuk near the Carpathian Mountains in 1929. I read that, I'm like, fucking, I'm in. After a childhood was spent during the Second World War, Beksinski went on to university, where he studied architecture in Krakow. Subsequent to his education, he spent several years as a construction site supervisor, a job he hated, fraught with pressures and countless boring details. He would soon throw himself into the arts. In 1958, Beksinski began to gain critical praise for his photography and later went on to drawing. His highly detailed drawings are often quite large, and many remind some of the works of Ernst Fuchs in their intricate and nearly obsessive rendering. So I read about this guy, and I'm like, well, yeah, man, this is my dude. But it was his paintings that got me. And I was thinking to myself, well, if hell exists, like in The Sandman, hell's a place. You can go to hell. And hell has layers, it has the circles of hell, Dante's circles of hell. Hieronymus Bosch, there's there's truth in all of that, and Neil Gaiman made use of it. So here was some of Beksinski's work. And in terms of aesthetics and like, to me, bones, like citadels and all kinds of craziness. And like, this is what I imagine, like, we would see this would be a vampire overlord walking with a wolf with the citadel behind him. I mean, how fucking rad would this be on camera, on screen? Look at this. And I was looking at all of Beksinski's work, and I'm like thinking to myself, okay. I mean, look at this. Vampire, like desiccated. Maybe the vampires use their own dead to create art on the walls. I mean, you never know. This was an aesthetic I'd never seen. Come on. Like, to me, this would be how you're going into Mordor, but this would be like the opening, going into the vampire citadel or whatever. And I mean, just like Beksinski said, he doesn't even know what his paintings mean. But I'm looking at this stuff and I'm thinking, fuck, yes. I mean, this is it, man. This is it. And this is what I was wanting. And, a lot of this imagery has been borrowed. We've seen things, Silent Hill. We've seen things in video games that have definitely heavily borrowed from this over the last 20 years. But the thing that I wanted a cosmology. And the idea was that hell had architects. Hell had aesthetics. Hell had beauty in its own way. And what would the architects of hell use to build these citadels? The bones of creatures. Like, they didn't have brick and mortar. They had bones. They had the ancient skins of long dead creatures that no longer existed. Maybe when Cthulhu dies, the old ones die. They get the desiccated husks of Cthulhu, and they can build from those things. I mean, this is all part of my mind. And I'm like, okay, this is because it had to look this way. And like the vampires, the older vampires wore the finest ancient skins of not necessarily humans, but of long dead creatures that haven't been around for millions of years. Maybe that came from other realms, different planets. I don't know. The new vampires wanted to wear Armani suits, but the older you got, the more in touch you were with the universe. Maybe you were in touch with Cthulhu. Who knew? Maybe hell was a Lovecraftian nightmare. Hadn't gotten that far yet. But the idea was, in the movie, I really wanted the juxtaposition of the vampires being other. And I was obsessed with a cosmology. We had to create a cosmology. And people, when I would pitch this script, and I gave you a little bit of my pitch. I thought my pitch was good. I'd pitch it quickly. And then I had this gigantic art, one of those zip art portfolios, and I had all these Beksinski paintings. I'd taken his book and took it apart and was flipping through it all. And then I had Rob Pryor's designs for the characters. And people loved it. They're like, oh my God. But all I'd made was this fakakta low-budget comedy. And everyone's like, how are you going to pull this off, Rob? And I'm like, come on, man. I've read every issue of Cinefex. I know more about special effects than 90% of the directors working in Hollywood today. Give me a break. So I'm explaining how I'm going to do all this stuff, too. Unfortunately, once that art portfolio, I left it in the back seat of my Saturn when I drove a Saturn, like 2003. Somebody broke into my car in front of my house in Hancock Park and stole my art portfolio. My entire pitch. Poof! Nothing happened with the movie, though. Never got made. But I was obsessed with the cosmology of it all. Because, again, if you had that cosmology, it would inform everything about the movie. It would inform how the vampires acted. And what I wanted to do was create, these are not the vampires of Fright Night. These are not Lost Boys. These were not the vampires from Near Dark. These were otherworldly creatures that were highly intelligent. They were elegant. They existed on a different plane from humanity. And I wanted to create an image of vampirism and this culture, a whole culture. I mean, you needed to know anyway, the same way that James Cameron created the Na'vi, I wanted to do that with vampires because no one had ever done it before. And I'm like, how fucking rad would that have been? It would have been rad. And a lot of these ideas have been already used and others. That's the problem when we've all read the same vampire literature. I mean, everyone's read Vampire Lestat. Everyone's read stuff like They Thirst, and everyone's read Vampire Junction and Live Girls by Ray Garton. Say what you want. People have read this stuff, splatterpunk novels. So the idea is they get... Near Dark had the idea of a young kid becoming a vampire. That was, Claudia from Near Dark. I want some more. Kristen Dunst. So, how do you make things new? I don't know. But for me, it was all about the cosmology. And watching the Exorcist trailer yesterday, the Exorcist Believer trailer, I'm like... It bothered me because the Exorcist cosmology... And look, I'm talking about the original. I mean, Exorcist 2, The Heretic, completely changed the cosmology. Pazuzu and Africa and all this stuff. We moved away from the Judeo-Christian to something else, which could have been badass. And by the way, I used to hate Exorcist 2. I'd say it's one of the worst things ever made. I'm a defender of it as a John Borman movie. It's not a great sequel to The Exorcist. Exorcist 3 is a great sequel to The Exorcist. But when I was watching Exorcist Believer... It's like they're bringing Chris McNeil back. I'm like, okay, I get it. You want to have, she's alive, Ellen Burstyn, she's fantastic. You're going to bring her back. The fuck does she know about possession? Nothing. Where's the priests, man? Where's Father Marin? Where's the equivalent of Marin or Father Karras? I don't know. Maybe they're in there. That chick from The Leftovers? I don't know. But I'm just like, where's the cosmology, man? I watching this, the trailer. The trailer, I don't even want to condemn something based on the trailer, but I'm like, the cosmology here is wrong. I mean, yeah, you're going to get your Judeo-Christian imagery. But if you're not buying into it, you can't blaspheme that which you do not believe in. And one of the great things is how blasphemous The Exorcist is, the original. And I said something on Twitter. Somebody said, well, she already in touch with Captain Howdy, so that's when we know the devil's first come to her. I'm like, but that's not really the point. There is no Captain Howdy Ouija cosmology in The Exorcist. It's certainly there, but I don't think William Friedkin or William Peter Blatty was saying that, if anything, the demon is already there and the Ouija board's just a manifestation of that. But whatever. I wouldn't say that. To me, the lack of cosmology is the Exorcist cosmology, because we know it's biblical. It's biblical. It's scriptural. So we have a framework, and it already works. But anyway, so I was thinking about horror that I really love, and there is a horror series, a series of books that I think the reason that I love these books, imagine it takes a bunch of stuff that I like, the military and political action of Tom Clancy novels, the globe-trotting of James Bond with colorful villains, bleeding-edge technology and science fiction, but most of all, it takes all of these things that we know, all of these well-worn horror tropes, and it brings them into our real world, and it gives them all believable cosmology. Like the first book, and they are the Joe Ledger series. Actually, there's now 2 different Joe Ledger series, but the original Joe Ledger DMS series of books by Jonathan Mayberry. And I discovered these, I want to say the first one came out in 2009. And, I read a lot of horror novels, and I'm always looking for stuff that's good. And there's not a lot of great horror novels. I mean, this is the perfect synthesis of B action, everything about it. It's a heady, frothy mix. And here's the first book, Patient Zero, which actually, unfortunately, it's a zombie story. Now zombies are old hat, but it gives you a very real world reason. And it makes zombies more relevant within the realm of what's going on. And then the second book is The Dragon Factory. The third book is The King of Plagues. The fourth book is Assassin's Code. The fifth book is The Extinction Machine. What an incredible title. And then kind of a sequel to the first book, Code Zero, which, by the way, I didn't love this book, to be honest. Although it does have a climax at Dragon Con, which is fucking hilarious. But so these books, like they were tried. CBS wanted to turn these books into a procedural. I actually have the pilot script back in 2010. A procedural, like, I mean, come on, man. And look, I'm getting flashing red that my stream is being interrupted. Now it's back. But they tried to turn this into like a Monster of the Week story. They shouldn't do that. This is a perfect streaming series, and like the Jack Reacher, or like what we've got on is it Amazon? Netflix? Well, the Jack Reacher series, the new one with Alan in it, Alan Richardson, who's a great Jack Reacher, by the way. They should do a season a book, because it's got an ongoing meta narrative, and then each story it's an individual story. But why I love these books is it takes things like, even it touches on Cthulhu. It has aliens. It has vampires. It has Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It has mutant animals. It has It has all of it. But it makes it all in the real world. It figures out how to make you believe in all of this stuff. So it gives it all a real world framework. It takes all these very famous, well-worn, well-trodden horror tropes. And then the main character, our hero, Joe Ledger, is a part of the DMS, the Department of Military Science. The Department of Military Science. And they have to, they're like imagine a militarized, imagine Delta Force X-Files team. It's amazing. The book's great. I highly recommend them if you want to read some killer pulp military horror that has great cosmology, great characters, a great overarching story, kick-ass villains. Little light on the sex, got to be honest. But they're great. They're great. And they have this cosmology that I love. And so I think for myself, one of the things that I'm looking for in all of the fiction that I'm consuming, all these things that I love, is a believable cosmology. And if I don't get that, I don't like what I'm watching. And most recently, in Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, I'm not sure what's going on in that movie. They give you an AI that has been locked into a submarine somehow, and the source code's in a submarine, but I don't know what the AI is doing, and I don't know what the AI wants. Everybody wants the AI. They want to control the AI. There's all this talk about, but when it comes to things like AI, we go all the way back to like Colossus the Forbin Project in 1970 with Eric Braeden, and we know what Colossus wants. Demon Seed, Julie Christie, Proteus, wants to live and literally locks a woman in this house and uses her, basically this artificial intelligence figures out a way to synthesize, well, you have to watch it, but it has its way with this woman to impregnate her and have himself, this artificial intelligence, be born. It's crazy. So we've seen, artificial intelligence for over 50 years, go back to Metropolis, all the way back into the 1920s. But I found myself thinking about Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning and being disappointed with the lack of the cosmology in terms of the world itself. Like, it was very loosey-goosey. And then there's all these action scenes, and I'm like, what does this have to do with the AI? And I kept waiting. I thought that the Gabriel character, the Isai Morales character, like, there would be acolytes that are now like we had the apostles in Rogue Nation or whatever. But what if you had a bunch of religious zealots that believed in the age of AI and believed in this growing artificial intelligence? I mean, there's been a lot of really cool, interesting artificial intelligence stuff that's happened in the world, and I wanted more of that, and I didn't get enough of it. But what I need, what I wanted to talk about, what I've brought to you now, and I ask you imagination connoisseurs, do you need cosmology in your science fiction, fantasy, and horror? Do you need a framework for the universe that your story is taking place in order for the story to work for you? And I think that a lot of writers of speculative fiction, especially on movies and TV, like, one of the things I love about For All Mankind is they've really thought about the universe that it exists in. And I mean because it's an alternate history, they've really figured it out. Like, what was happening that is like our history, and what is happening that's different. The writers of Star Trek, especially Strange New Worlds, just decided, nah, we're not going to pay it. So I'm listening to Akiva Goldsman talk about the fact that, we just decided that we're going to push everything 30 years in the future. Well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, because nothing happens the same way. Why would there even be a eugenics wars 30 years in the future? Everything would be completely different. The whole point of the idea of the eugenics wars in Star Trek is that it would have been a program that would have been started at the end of World War II. And if you look into American history, there's a lot of talk of eugenics all the way back into the 1800s. And, of course, Nazi scientists wanting to create the Übermensch. The insinuation by even bringing up the idea of the eugenics wars at all was that Khan and his followers that rose to power in the 1990s would have been created by scientists, probably like an adjunct to Project Paperclip or whatever. Nazi scientists the West probably took, and it came out of that. So to just decide to move everything forward, who's to say anything would happen the same? It shows a complete lack of understanding of time or the universe itself. It's like, you can't just say that a gigantic event in the Star Trek universe. I've never understood, this is one of the things I've never understood about Star Trek that drives me crazy. The Star Trek universe is not our universe. And the idea that you're saying that, we have to push the eugenics wars further into the future because they haven't happened in our world yet is absurd, because they're never going to happen in our world. I mean, and that idea is dumb. It was supposed to be immutable. And then when they say, oh, times change, it's things don't just happen exactly the same way 30 years hence. That's not how it works. It's so dumb. So the cosmology of Star Trek has been completely shattered in Strange New Worlds and Discovery and since Star Trek 09. And not only has it been completely shattered, they just don't care. They think and people are watching this. They're watching a show with no, like, ask yourself the cosmology of what does it mean to be a Vulcan? So if Spock's turned into a full human, it doesn't mean he's forgotten who he is. It means his physiology is different. He would still have the mind of a Vulcan. It's not like he's suddenly a vegan and because he's in a human body, he's going to just pick up bacon and eat it. And he might enjoy it, but he would enjoy it as a Vulcan as well. He's just not a meat eater. That's why he doesn't eat it. I mean, when you get turned into a human being, you wouldn't suddenly just forget his dietary. You can be a vegan and be a human as well. But no, now we have Spock eating bacon. And you ask yourself, well, that's dumb. Like, okay, so now it would be much more of an existential crisis for a Vulcan to be turned into a full human because there would be physiological differences he would have to deal with. They didn't even get into that. They made it seem like, oh, he's a teenager with cravings and urgings. And I hate that. It just shows a lack of imagination and a lack of understanding. And the same thing is true like when I watched the Exorcist trailer. I had no indication from that trailer that they have an understanding what is their cosmological framework about possession. Now, I know maybe they'll get into it in the movie. I bet you they're not gonna, though. Because nobody cares. Nobody cares. Like, if you make a modern vampire movie, like in Twilight, it started out as, is she Mormon who wrote the Twilight series? You changed the vampire story because you wanted to keep a little bit of the vampire, but basically what you wanted to write was a teen romance novel. And the vampire, it was so great because you have these two mythical creatures, a vampire and a werewolf, but they're the perfect boyfriends for a teenage girl because they don't want to fuck her. And that's perfect. If you want to sell books to teenage girls, you give them the beautiful androgynous creatures that they are, strapping pretty boys that will tell you, they'll pour their hearts out to you, but they don't want you to jerk them off. Perfect YA characters. You make them fantasy creatures that can be lusted over, but then they're not gonna take you too far, which is perfect. I thought it was a brilliant idea. But anyway, what do you guys think? Am I crazy? Am I taking this too far? Do people think I'm nuts? Does it really matter? Do you not want? Do you think that I've pushed it too far? Matthew Stanley sends in a tip and says, Strange New Worlds and Discovery are such shite. I grew up loving the OG. TNG, DS9, hell, even Enterprise is better. But the shit we're getting today. I have a newfound appreciation for Rick Berman now because fuck Akiva, what a hack. I grok you, Rob. Never change. Well, Matthew, that's very nice. Thank you. But, again, for me, it comes down to they haven't put the time in. They don't care about their universe. They write these stories, these generic stories. I mean, my God, turning Spock from half Vulcan to full human is such a lame. There's a reason it had never been done before. I'm sure that story had been rejected since 1966, but they decided to tell it. To me, really dumb. But it shows that they don't understand their own characters. Genetol says, did you see Oppenheimer yet? No, I had tickets to see it last Thursday. I'm waiting to see it in 70mm IMAX. There are no tickets till next week. It's killing me, but I really want to see it in IMAX. I have to go. Grubie Don't Play says, hey, Rob, the Secret Invasion finale was amazing. I haven't felt a feeling like this since seeing Inhumans in IMAX. I'm easy to please, but come on. Love you, G. Well, let me just say, Grubie Don't Play, as somebody who really enjoyed the Secret Invasion scripts, let's just say I do not share, I know you're being facetious, but your optimistic appraisal during the situation. But let me just say I was overall very disappointed. I kind of knew it was going in that direction when I thought the original scripts were, again, dumbed down. I also thought Secret Invasion, the direction wasn't good. I thought the series was very flat. It dealt with big global ramifications. I thought it was really sort of dumbed down. The way I read the scripts was much more in the vein of Tom Clancy, much more of something like Clear and Present Danger or Sum of All Fears. And I didn't get that. And I was very, very disappointed. Scott Bartholomew says H.P. Lovecraft is a good example of horror cosmology, i.e. the great ones. It's true. That's one of the things. The thing about H.P. Lovecraft as a storyteller, even though, yeah, he was a racist, but his cosmology was fascinating. And it made his tales terrifying. And whether, he was telling stories of Miskatonic University or The Color Out of Space or the Cthulhu mythos, in the Mountains of Madness, there was an unknowable or a real, the cosmic horror that was out there made his stories terrifying. And I love that. And, I really am a fan. Esteban Rivera says, we need another Riddick. I'm just putting this here. Again, you know what? I liked Riddick. The necromongers, the underworld, had a cosmology. It had a belief. It did something really interesting. And while I don't think, look, I'm a big lover of Chronicles of Riddick. I was just like, to me, like Pitch Black, great B movie. They took I made the mistake once of interviewing David Twohy, saying I love the way. To me, David Twohy was very similar to John Carpenter. Like, although it's perhaps a little simplistic, John Carpenter, when he made his movies, he was going to make 3 movies for live films. He only made 2. He made Prince of Darkness and he made They Live. He made Prince of Darkness for $3 million. If you're going to make a $3 million horror movie, Prince of Darkness is my jam, man. I mean, quantum physics and religion. I loved it. The anti-God, the anti-particle. The god plutonium will not save you. In fact, you will not be saved. Give me that. I love Prince of Darkness. I love everything about Prince of Darkness. Yeah, but Riddick, I'd love to see another Riddick. They're going to make one, I think. The Sundowners Club says, the rules of the stories like Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, is why they are detailed with the maps of those worlds, the cosmology of it all. Exactly right. And that's what makes us love them. Because if the author or the creator has all of this information, they've thought about it all. They've created their own cosmology, which means everything that's happening is governed by the rules of the cosmology they create for their universe. And when I know that that's the case, it makes me much more interested in the stories they're telling. I think one of the things, and not to rip on George Lucas, but, George Lucas wrote a fairly simple tale. It was all the other people that, and I'm not saying George Lucas, he created this universe, he created these characters, but he was lucky at every level with both Star Wars and Empire to have collaborators who took all of these ideas and elevated them. It was all the other people. It was the technicians at ILM. They had to think about all these things. Like, okay, how is this all going to work? And Irvin Kershner is another director coming in to direct a story. George Lucas set it all up, but what you want collaborators to plus everything. I've often read that, Star Wars was saved in the edit. Every movie's saved in the edit. I mean, it really is. That's where movies, and some movies need to be saved more than others, but the editorial process is a rewriting process, and you need people, you need great editors, but the people that worked on Star Wars were great. But the Sundowners Club, yeah, the cosmology of it is very, very important, and by the way, it doesn't matter how savvy of a reader you are, whether you are a diehard or whether you're a casual reader. The better the cosmology is of the universe that you're dipping your mind into, the better off your experience is going to be. That's another Burnett axiom. If the cosmology is there, it'll be a better experience for you as a reader. Which I think it's a truism. Joe Penora says, I liked Dracula 2000 when they made Gerard Butler's Dracula Judas. Cool concept. Great cool concept. Because what that does is it adds a whole layer of cosmology. Then if Gerard Butler's Dracula is Judas, who's Jesus? I mean, very, very interesting. And that's what makes things more interesting. So I'm a fan. I'm a fan of all of that. And that's what I want from my fantasy, science fiction, and horror. I want cosmology. And I'll tell you something. You know, the real question, what I find very, very interesting about Halloween, for instance, you know, there's the idea of at the end when Dr. Loomis says, when Jamie Lee Curtis says, when Laurie Strode says at the end of first Halloween, he was the boogeyman. Donald Pleasant says, as a matter of fact, he was. If you can also give something more cosmology than it needs. And that's what they did with all the other Halloween sequels after Halloween 2. Well, 3. Halloween 4, 5, 6, all the other Halloweens. He's a product of a cult. He's this, he's that. Why is he the way he is? Sometimes all you need is the Judeo-Christian idea of faith. And there are demons. You don't need to know where they live. You don't need to know, like, is there a hell where, like, they have condos? You don't need that. And you don't need that with something like The Exorcist. To add something to The Exorcist is to actually take away from it. So you have to know when to do it. But like The Ring, I mean, that's a lot of cosmology to put into what you're asking people to do. But see, that's interesting too, because like one of the things I love about Asian horror, especially like J-horror, when they brought a lot of Japanese horror, like if there's a curse put on you, if you do something bad in a house, yes, some ghost lives there. They don't go away. Like you're in a temple in Japan, you're praying to your ancestors. You know why? Because they're watching you. That's part of Asian culture. They watch you all the time. You have to honor your ancestors. If you don't, you get fucked. That's what J-horror is all about. As a matter of fact, I want to share this with you because this is my new Bible. My new Bible right here. The Anatomy of Genres. How story forms explain the way the world works. All of you imagination connoisseurs, I guarantee you, whether you want to write screenplays, whether you want to write books, or whether you just want to enhance your love of stories, get this book. It's so good. And what's interesting is, so this is by John Truby. He has written another book called The Anatomy of Story, which I also highly recommend. This book is awesome. And Truby really knows his shit. Now, I just want to read. I won't read a lot. It's story time, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, imagination connoisseurs. So, the first genre he talks about is what? Horror. And what does he call it? Religion. Now, listen to this. This is so great. So great. Adam and Eve. One of the first horror stories. Although monsters have been present in story from the beginning, Genesis in the Old Testament is where horror elements first come together as a genre. Adam and Eve are the first man, first woman, and first couple. They live in paradise and are innocent and unashamed of their nakedness. But they're confronted by the trickster character, the devil in the form of a serpent. He lures Eve into eating the poison the forbidden apple from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Enter God the Father, the couple's second opponent. According to him, the cost to Adam and Eve of gaining knowledge is losing their immortality. They are expelled from the garden so that they cannot eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge and live forever. To know is to die. The father is a tyrant. When his children make the mistake of wanting to understand their world and themselves, their punishment is to be driven out of paradise. In this story, we see the fundamental distinction between life and death and the tendency of the religion story to use horror as its preferred form of expression. That's how he starts his chapter on horror. And here's something else he says. Horror, how does it work? Horror's basic distillation of life versus death is a binary opposition that allows for no complexity. One is either dead or alive. This points to a fundamental quality of the human mind. It always begins in binary mode. It starts with yes, no, either or, me, other, us, them. The horror genre itself is not so simple, however. Hegel's great insight about the flaw leading to the next step of enlightenment is based on the idea that from a simple binary opposition known as the dialectic, we create the new, the better, and the diverse. Thinking about the elemental forces of life and death can inspire great creativity. Horror, especially realistic horror, often focuses on the finality of death and how humans cannot comprehend the idea that they will no longer exist. Every genre shows the mind reacting to the world and then acting upon it. Each lays out a different understanding of how the world works and how it works best. And this is the genre's mind-action story view. The horror version of the mind-action story view is that life is an ongoing struggle to defeat death. It is a fight we are all destined to lose. Great horror storytelling pushes the audience into a smaller and smaller box until that box is in the ground. Horror makes us feel what it means to be dead. And this increases the power of death in our minds tenfold. No longer is it an abstraction that happens to everyone else. The idea that the magnificent complexity of a human being, especially this human being, could suddenly cease to exist is too absurd to comprehend. In essence, the horror story strategy is to have a unique monster relentlessly pursue a victim. This plot sequence translates into pressure on the hero and thus the audience. And after contemplating the finality of death, we end by asking, what is to be done? Surely there is an answer somewhere, but we can't find it. That too is death. There is no hope. That is, unless there is something like a god or religion. Horror expresses the story of religion. This is the story of how we defeat death, how we avoid a horrible afterlife, and find the promised land of life ever after. The main goal of the horror mind-action story is to force us to confront death, to pry our eyes open and shove death in our face. Whether this highly emotional approach induces us to see our end honestly and make real changes to our own lives is another question. I'm telling you, that's how this shit begins, man. And you read this, and he just gets it. He just understands story. Get this book, read it, The Anatomy of Genres, How the Story Forms Explain the Way the World Works. He's right. It's awesome. Ernest Rister, our friend Ernest Rister says, Dear Rob, Earl of Erudition, watched Salem's Lot on a black and white transistor TV as a 7-year-old. Mark, open the window. And to this day, that made-for-TV movie scares me more than almost any horror movie. You know what? I think that's true. Anybody, if you saw Salem's Lot on TV and you saw it over those 2 nights, man, that shit was dope. I don't know if it holds up. I mean, I haven't watched it in a long time, but it's certainly interesting. Ernest Rister says, having said that, I earned the ire of female coworkers criticizing Twilight. If you were immortal, what possible worst hell for yourself could there be than attending high school for decades? Yeah, because most people don't think about their cosmologies, but that's a very good point. Can you imagine? High school for decades, my God. Thomas Logan says, Bobby, take us through the cosmology of Dune. Well, just read the Quran. That's all you have to do, is read the Quran. No, that's an oversimplification. The cosmology of Dune, that's a big cosmology too. That's one of the reasons that one of the things I love about Dune is like all the prophecy on Arrakis is a bunch of bullshit. I mean, it was the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood's been implanting prophecies around the universe for thousands of years, and of course, the Fremen believe it. But who's to say that prophecy isn't coming true? You know, it's all very interesting. But come on, Thomas, you know I couldn't take you through the entire cosmology of Dune because there's so much of it. But I do love the idea that a cosmology for a society can be created, because it certainly relates back to our society now, doesn't it? But that's why I think Dune has a lot to say about our civilization even now. Nick Parrish says, so Rob, I know it's been a while since I mentioned the purgatory that is Tubi. But I will say, if you've ever asked yourself, hey, where's this actor or actress been? The good news is if you browse the Tubi original section, you'll receive your answer. Oh, that's sad. Look, people got to work. And, it's sad that you think about it. Most actors and actresses don't end up having A-list careers. I myself have been in the purgatory of low-budget indie stuff for a long time. That doesn't mean I don't try and as I could to make whatever I'm working on great. But actors and actresses, if you want to act, are you going to be lucky to only work in A-list stuff? If you really think about it, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of actors in the world working on stuff all the time, but we only know the top 50 of them. So maybe Tubi is not such a bad thing. Nick Parrish goes on to say, I saw Camilla Bell on the thumbnail of a Tubi movie. Joey Lawrence, Michael Madsen, and Eric Roberts is in something called DC Down. Is that like the Olympus Has Fallen, but a cheaper version? Tubi continues to claim actors' souls never to be seen again outside of the Tubi netherrealm. Well, remember, Eric Roberts was in the Dark Knight. Eric Roberts has had a crazy career. Ernest Rister says, so just quickly, speed date answer, what are your 5 scariest movies? Oh, God, that's too hard. I mean, I'd say The Exorcist, Autopsy of Jane Doe, I think is really scary. It's hard because I think Alien is a really scary movie if you've never seen it before and don't know what it's about. But I don't know. There's not a lot of horror movies are scary. I really like existential dread, but those are 3 that I think are very scary. Culture Wars Diplomacy says, magic solving problems works when we can appreciate how the magic works, so it doesn't feel like a cheat. A paraphrase of Brandon Sanderson. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. But again, you can have all the magic you want, but it has to be governed by rules. The magic has to have rules. Like for instance, if you have a magical being that can just go, I want the Earth's atmosphere to be perfect and there's no more global warming, I wouldn't believe that a magical being, even if it was magical, if they were magical, could do that. I mean, I wouldn't believe that they could. Because I would be like, well, how would your magical powers in your mind or whatever it is you control, how would you know exactly what needed to be done to fix the atmosphere of the Earth? You wouldn't know. So by being able to do that, your intellect doesn't guide you. So even if you have magical powers, you still have to know how something works to be able to solve it with your magic, I would think. Because otherwise you're asking, I don't like it when a problem is solved by some kind of an intellect. There's no go-between. Like somebody wants to do something and there's some kind of an intellectual problem that needs to be, like if something is supposed to happen to you and somebody has to make a choice, like monkey's paw stories, things like that. I'm wondering, okay, who, for instance, if you have a genie, the old story that if you find a genie and you rub a lamp and the genie gives you 3 wishes and it's always be careful what you wish for, and the genie always puts you in a position of, okay, you get what you wished for, but it's always a terrible perversion of what you were really looking for. I never liked those stories because the genie or some other force, some other intellectual force that maybe the genie's only an agent for that force, is fucking with you. And it's like, well, how does it know to do that? Immediately, instantaneously. That's something that's always bothered me because, like, if you're like, give me all the money, I want to be rich, the richest man in the world, and then somebody makes you Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin prosecuting the Ukrainian war. Well, what are you going to do with all that money? It's like, oh, great, I've got all of Vladimir Putin's riches or whatever, the hundreds of billions of dollars he stole from the Russian people, but this is not where I want to be with all that money. So somebody makes, and if the genie does that to you, I always hate those stories because it seems disingenuous. A good version of that is the Twilight Zone episode where the guy's dead and he meets what he thinks is his guardian angel, and he basically says, I want to win, I want to become a great gambler, and I want all the women to love me and my life to be great. And the guardian angel's like, okay, and gives him his wish. And he becomes like the greatest gambler in the world. He can get any woman he wants, and he winds up bored. Life has no meaning if there's no risk. And there's no risk, there's no real reward if you get everything you want. And he says to the guardian angel, he says, I'm just paraphrasing this version of the story, but he's like, look, man, I can't take it here. Send me to the other place. And the guardian angel, the Twilight Zone ending is, this is the other place. He's been in hell the whole time. I love stuff like that. Okay. Nick. I'm not going to fall for that one. Oppenheimer was amazing. Thank you, Nick. I'm sure it was. I'm a big Chris Nolan fan, but I will not fall for these silly games. But Nick, I'm just going to say Nick. So I'm glad you liked Oppenheimer. A Silly Goose says, I'm glad you brought the cosmology around Hellraiser. I've always thought that the lore in the universe deserved more than the movies after 1 and 2 gave it, but the most recent one got pretty close. Its depiction of hell and higher powers tickles my imagination. Yeah, I agree. And that was one of the things I really dug about Hellraiser. There was a lot going on that we didn't really realize, but I mean, I love the first Hellraiser. And I love the idea that Frank Cotton is just this awful person that'll just bang his brother's wife, and and she's doing is dreaming of him. She'll kill for him. He's so good in bed that she'll kill for him. So he'll come back and just give her what she wants, and she bores him to tears. Clive Barker's got it going on. And by the way, if you guys haven't read any Clive Barker, the man's twisted imagination. I remember, when Stephen King started going on about his books of blood, get his books of blood, read The Damnation Game, read The Great and Secret Show, read Everville, read Imagica, read Nightbreed. I mean, he's written some far out, really twistedly fantastical stuff, or fantastically twisted. I highly recommend. It's not for everybody, but Anonymous says, so we first have Skrulls and then Kang, but nobody's mentioned anything about freaking Arishem the Judge. He literally moved the skies. The MCU is lost. I don't understand, man. I don't understand why, I don't understand why someone in the MCU, they could have done this after WandaVision, where we took our two fun characters, and why didn't we do a show called, like The Marvels, where you have two human characters traveling around Earth after everybody comes back from the blip, dealing with where the world is now. Everybody's just blissfully unaware of the fact that all of humanity now knows that they're part of... there's aliens everywhere. There's Arishem the Judge. There's the Guardians of the Galaxy. There's the Avengers. There's Thanos. There's people that whatever you believe... Did you have any experience of your God when you were blipped away for 5 years? No. So where did you go? The religions of the world would be in turmoil. That's another thing. The cosmology of the MCU has been broken since Spider-Man No Way or Far From Home. And that's the real problem with the MCU. Their cosmology's gone. All they do, there's no more cosmology. We knew what the cosmology of the MCU was. All the way up through Far From Home, which is the end of Phase 3. We knew what it was. We knew Thanos. We understand. We got where he was coming from. We understood the universe. All of that all made sense. Everybody made, the Midgard, all that, it all worked. And after that, didn't work anymore. Bummer. Nick Parrish says, one of two. Rob, I would like to take a minute to address Monday morning quarterbacking in Hollywood. after this past weekend's huge overall box office numbers, I heard people say that some takeaways they learned is make a good movie or market your movie well. Look, and then Nick goes on to say, Rob, this commentary always annoys me because there are plenty of well-reviewed and well-marketed movies throughout history that have underperformed. The point being that it's always hard to make the market movies for fickle human masses. Also, Nick, I think it's important to realize that the Barbenheimer phenomenon, just like a meme stock brought GameStop up or AMC made them millions of dollars, no one is, because here's the thing, Hollywood can't take credit for Barbenheimer as it was a social movement. It was a social movement. Social media took these two very disparate movies, and it was a perfect storm. People are going to try and create this. It'll never happen again. You couldn't have two more diametrically opposed movies than Barbie and Oppenheimer. And I'll tell you something else. The blowback, everyone knows who Greta Gerwig is now. People are wondering if Cillian Murphy will play Ken in a new Barbie movie. This was a perfect storm, a once-in-a-lifetime event. It will not come around again, and everyone's going to try and think about who was responsible. You know who was responsible? You were, imagination connoisseurs were, everybody on social media was. They turned this thing into something, blew it all up, and made it an event. This was, the Barbenheimer phenomenon was something, first of all, on one hand, nobody could believe that anybody made a Barbie movie, first of all. You know, and on the other hand, everyone knows what kind of movies Christopher Nolan makes. And Oppenheimer was so far away from the Barbie movie in every respect. I mean, you're literally dealing with the fate of the human race, the end of civilization itself, and then you're dealing with Barbie, which might be the ultimate plastic example of where Western civilization has led us where we shouldn't be. I mean, and there's so many things that are going on, but remember, the box office and this entire thing was created because the internet, us, the public, all of us collectively, created this memeable moment that translated and might have saved Hollywood's summer. Because everything else we were getting, it's like, oh, another Indiana Jones movie. We got the first one in 1981. Oh, another Mission Impossible movie. Got the first one of those in 1996. I mean, how can you look at the box office, and it's not that those movies were necessarily the same. Look, they had to deal with the fact that I think there was a lot of apathy. Mission Impossible, people liked it. You go see it. I think the more I think about it, the more I honestly think, and this is, I'm not taking anything away from Tom Cruise and Chris McQuarrie because I love Rogue Nation and love Fallout. I think that Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning might be my least favorite of all 7 Mission Impossible movies because it's not about anything. It really isn't. It has no story. It's got some vague story about an AI that throws great parties in Europe, which could have been the great story for a Mission Impossible movie. What if there was an AI and instead of it escaped and it realizes it just wants to throw raves? I want to make that movie. I'll make the flip side of this Dead Reckoning movie. And I want to make a movie about an AI that escapes and it just wants to have fun. I mean, wouldn't that be fun? I'd go see that movie with great music. But yeah, so Nick, I would say that this Barbenheimer thing was a once-in-a-lifetime event. We saw it happen. Luckily, both Barbie and Oppenheimer are good movies that actually have something to say. And even though I haven't seen either one of them, I would say that both do, and I'm glad that they're successful. Scott Bartholomew says, modern Trek since 2009 actually ruins the cosmology of the Star Trek universe. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. That's why modern Star Trek is terrible. It destroyed the whole cosmology of the Star Trek universe. And now they don't even know. When Akiva Goldsman, it's amazing. I went to conventions when I was a kid. I'm like, for a guy who's won an Academy Award, Akiva, and when I listen to you talk, you sound like you're a smart guy. But I don't think you really understand why Star Trek has endured. Like, all the people working on Star Trek now do not take it seriously. at any level. Mike McMahon, who does Lower Decks, like I said, he's outside of it. It's all fun. I mean, he loves Star Trek. He gets it. But like so many of my friends that work in comedy, I get it. I understand. They do not take it seriously. They are not inside their own cosmology. All of Lower Decks is outside the cosmology of Star Trek. And that crossover episode, what it did now was it pulled Strange New Worlds outside of its own cosmology. Fucking hate it. I hate it all. None of it, I can't take any of it seriously. None of it, because none of it is believable within its. Star Trek has no cosmology of its own, and it was something that maybe all of roads lead back to Star Trek and storytelling with me, but it doesn't work. Modern Star Trek. I know people watch it and they're fine because they're not thinking deeply about it, and that's not a criticism. I understand they're getting generic. Ooh, here's an emotional beat we can hit. You know, Spock talking to his mother. Oh, well, because anybody talking to their mother can be turned into, Dad, can we have a catch? If you want to recreate the end of Field of Dreams, go right ahead. Everyone's going to respond to it. Does that make it good Star Trek? No. Thomas Logan says, you're seated to watch Oppenheimer and you get sucked Last Action Hero style into the Dune 2 trailer. You're now in front of Shaddam IV, the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, or Christopher Walken. What do you say to him? What happens now that you're stuck with him? I would say Emperor Shaddam, Paul Atreides is a much greater threat than you might believe. And unless you come to grips with this right now, billions of people are going to die. And then I'd be looking for a way to get to Paul Atreides the entire time. But I don't know if they would listen to me because he would be much more interested in where did I come from. But that's what I would say. Zachary Zabali says, I believe The Exorcist is scary for those who are religious. What is the draw for those who are not religious? Does it scare the non-religious too? That's a very good question, Zachary. I would say it does. Why? Because, look, there is what we would call evil in this world that we see on a daily basis, what one human being does to another human being. The horrible things that we visit upon one another. And we tell ourselves that there is actual, for whatever reason, whether you're religious or not, when you're, look, as they say, there are no atheists in foxholes. And when you are confronted with an evil, whether you believe in it or not, whether you believe it's religious in nature or not, the great thing about The Exorcist is it does a fantastic job of taking a sweet girl and corrupting her utterly and defile her in such a way that it doesn't matter whether you're religious or not. It's so horrifying. And you're even though you're watching a priest, Father Karras is a guy that you totally identify with. You know, he might as well, he comes from a poor immigrant family. And the reason The Exorcist works so well is it drops you into the very real world of milieus that you've seen before, that you understand. And so even though hell is broken loose, quite literally, savvy moviegoers, whatever your religious background is, I watched The Exorcist, I wish I was Catholic, so I was scared by it even more. But as a human being, it works on every level because of what it's showing you, the kind of corruption that it's showing you, and the kind of truly evil that you're confronting. So it's scary. So Scott Bartholomew says, when is 10 and 20 going to drop? The only problem is I don't have all the Star Trek episodes in editable format. I have to burn them off my Blu-rays, which I don't have the equipment to do right now. So I was getting all those from Darren Doctorman, but because of Comic-Con and stuff, he hasn't been able to transfer all of them to me, and he is gone until next week at a convention. So hopefully I'm going to get a Blu-ray where I can rip my Blu-rays. I know I shouldn't do that, but I'm going to do it anyway. Well, everybody, I think that brings me to the end of all of this. So, I'd be very curious to hear everybody weigh in on the idea of cosmologies in science fiction, fantasy, and horror literature. What do you guys think? How important do you think it is? Because here's the thing. We are seeing in certain shows, cosmology can extend to criminal empires. You know, you have to understand how things work. You know, like in Breaking Bad. How does Gus Fring's criminal enterprise or empire work? They have to know. They have to know, how does Gus Fring move his money? They know all of that. And once they know all of that, they can build stories understanding. See, when I watch Star Trek Discovery and they show you a fight on the inside of a turbo lift in the Discovery when there's nothing around it and you're like going over these chasms and it looks like you're in the middle of an Imperial Star Destroyer, I'm like, have any of you watched Star Trek? Has the effects team, have the writing team? And when they do stuff like that, I can't buy into anything more. But when you look at something, House of the Dragon, I mean, I know they have George R. R. Martin, even though HBO canceled his deal. You believe that he understands what's going on. He can tell you the answers to all these questions. I mean, some people who like the end of Game of Thrones, season 8, they're like, well, Rob, you know, Daenerys Targaryen was destined to go crazy and kill a bunch of people because her dad was the Mad King. I'm like, what? You know, the whole point of watching Dany struggle is the struggle between the brutality of the world. Is she going to become a benevolent dictator or a malevolent dictator? And it's not because she's fucking crazy. And you've been watching her. You've seen terrible things happen to her and good things happen to her. You've seen mercy. You've seen her not show mercy. And it was this choice. And at the end, when she just decides to blow everything up and kill everybody, that was dumb. You know, you're like, really? I've been watching this character struggle to understand who and what she's going to be. And at the end, she just decides to go crazy and kill a bunch of people. Like, see, that's exactly what I told you was going to happen because her dad was the Mad King. I'm like, well, that's not the story they've been telling for the last 7 seasons. Where's the cosmology there? That wasn't the story of Daenerys Targaryen, to watch 7 seasons of her struggle with how to be a queen, and then she just decides to go, fuck it, I'm just going to kill everybody. That was not cool. Brandon Martin says, William Friedkin was hired because he was an agnostic documentary filmmaker. The Exorcist is essentially an atheist movie and a religious one. Yeah, it is. But remember, I mean, he'd made The French Connection. He'd made The Boys in the Band. He'd made other movies before he got there. And The French Connection, he was hired because he's an Academy Award-winning director. And The Exorcist was a big book. So... Thomas Logan says, seeing Walken's face in a 5.5 story 1570 IMAX screen was legendary. The whole Dune 2 trailer is in 143-1. I DM'd you a pic I took to share on the stream. What? You sent me a picture to share on the stream, and you're just telling me now? Is that on Twitter? Let me look and see if you sent me it on Twitter. I'll put it up there. I don't... You DM'd me. I don't see it. I'm looking at my DMs right now. And I don't see it. So I don't know why. But I would put it up there. But yeah, I mean, seeing Walken's face is great. I love that trailer. I can't wait to see it. Can't wait to see it. So I'll have to find that picture and show it on the next stream. And on that note, I'm going to end this stream. I'm going to say thank you to Tom Jr. Jackson. I'm going to thank everybody who generously supports this channel via Super Chats, tips, memberships, all that. And what do you guys think? I'm really curious to hear what you guys think of cosmology and what works for you and what doesn't work for you and all of those things. Because I'm obsessed by it all. And I'm obsessed in terms of storytelling and how that all works. So, what do you all think? And hey, tomorrow is Elizabeth's birthday, and I won't tell you how old she is, but yeah, it's her birthday, so we're going out having a nice lunch and stuff like that. I don't know if I'll be back here tomorrow, but yeah, good stuff. Anyway, on that note, I just want to say, remember, oh, wait, somebody's saying, Zachary Zabali says, what about a meet and greet at Bordner's or another 80s club in La La Land and let's get Rob drunk? No, you know what? I haven't been drinking, and I drank at Comic-Con, and I got hammered to the point where it was embarrassing. I could barely speak. I got in fights with my good friends. I much prefer drinking water. 10 of these a day. It's hot as F out here. And, yeah. So, no, but we can go to Bordner's. And on that note, I will say goodnight to everybody, and thanks for jumping in. Remember, there's a new episode of, hopefully, there's a new episode of Israel Gets It Done of, well, King Tanic's, the Otaku Experience, so tune in for that. And everybody, go watch Lana Ewan's new video. She did a great video, great review of The Autopsy of Jane Doe, one of my favorite horror films of the last 10 years. Check it out. It's a good review. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty spoilerific, so maybe you don't want to watch it if it's too spoilery, but go watch it, give it a like, and leave her a comment, because she does a great job. And on that note, I will say to all of you, have a better night. Ooh, I really like that. Cosmology is the necessary context of the unreal. Len McClysick? Is it McClysick? That's a good one. I really like that. Well done, sir.